You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 7th of May, 2026, on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Fionnuala Sweeney. Coming up on today's programme.
No, I mean, it's a trip we had planned from before, and obviously we had some stuff that happened. And no, look, there's a lot to talk about with the Vatican. I'll give you one example. The Pope just returned from a trip to Africa.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been holding talks with Pope Leo at the Vatican. But is it amen to all that following the very public squabble between President Trump and Rome? And Eurovision week is almost upon us.
Absolutely, Fionnuala. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco, and for today's Global Countdown, we'll look at the Eurovision favourites this year.
As always, we'll have today's business news and the latest in design with Monocle's design editor, Nick Moniz. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Fionnuala Sweeney. Within the past couple of hours, Pope Leo has been having talks with the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio in the Vatican. The meeting comes at a delicate time in US papal relations, with President Trump calling Leo weak and terrible, telling him that he needs to get his act together and to stop catering to the radical left. While in Italy, Rubio will also hold talks with Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who, while initially a close ally of the Trump administration, has recently distanced herself amid disquiet about the war with Iran, which of course has led President Trump to threaten to withdraw US troops from Italy and Germany. Joining me now in the studio is Monocle's radio producer of the Foreign Desk, Anita Riotta, and from down the line in Zurich we're joined by Juliet Lindley, journalist, broadcaster and former Vatican correspondent. Juliet, if I can just begin with you, what do both sides want out of these talks?
Well, clearly, we'd like to think that that Rubio is there to sort of mend bridges. He's there to bring a semblance of normalcy back to the state of relations between the Vatican and the United States, which is at an absolute all-time low. Diplomatic relations were installed in 1984, and they have never been this dire. And the Pope's people are happy to meet Rubio. Clearly, there's a sense of there's been a huge disrespect on behalf of President Trump towards the Pope, but they said they're open to dialogue. And Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's equivalent of a prime minister, said, we're here and let's see what Rubio has to say. Pope Leo is open to dialogue, and he said it's too early to say whether there might even be a phone call between the pontiff and DJ Trump. But as Parolin said, we can't do without the US. Nobody can. And Washington is an interlocutor for the Holy See.
And how popular is Pope Leo among American Catholics? And I'm thinking particularly of those who would be to the right of centre, staunch Trump supporters.
So there are about 50 million Catholics in the US, and support is nosediving for Trump amongst them. These attacks on the Pope are not going down well at all. A large part of the American Catholic electorate is being alienated, and Rubio really needs to help fix that now with the Pope in Rome, and he needs to stop that electorate, that part of the electorate, from turning their backs on Trump in the midterms that are coming up really fast. So we're not going to know exactly what conversations took place between Rubio and the Pope. The Vatican never discloses that in any case. But you've got to guess that he's doing a very delicate sort of diplomatic balancing act. He's walking a very dangerous tightrope here because Rubio himself is Catholic, contrary to his boss. Trump isn't Catholic, but Rubio is. And he's really got to mend relations right now between DC and the Holy See.
We'll leave it there for the moment, Juliet, but if I can turn now to Anita, who is here in our studio. Marco Rubio due to have talks as well with the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, and she had initially been, seen as a staunch Trump supporter, but there has been a distancing of late. So what is the mood going into those talks?
Absolutely right. I think the mood between Rome and DC has never been lower, at least in the Trump era, with his relationship with Meloni. You know, to echo Juliet, I think there is a sense among Italians that the Pope is off limit, regardless of how pious you personally might be. So that actually had quite a sort of rally around the flag amongst Italians, I would say. Even Elly Schlein, who's the leader of the opposition party in Italy, had a big speech in Italian parliament, which went quite viral. And, you know, as most opposition leaders, she's normally at loggerheads with Meloni, very rarely has something positive to say about the Italian leader. But once Meloni spoke out about Trump's attacks on the Pope, and then Trump called her weak and sort of came out and attacked her, there was a real sense, both in Italian government and I would say, you know, Italians at large, you can come after us on political fronts, but you cannot just attack the leader of a sovereign nation like this.
And Washington is coming after Italy on a political front in the sense of this threat by President Trump to withdraw US troops from Italy as part of the lack of support, as he views it, for the war in Iran. So how is that going to be negotiated? How do you see that being played out?
Well, I think it's interesting here that this meeting will, you know, be an attempt to paper over tensions, but there's not just one real chasm between the two right now. I would say it's more of a sort of death by a million cut situation. You have to consider that we have the disrespect of the Pope, which we just said plays very poorly. We have the war in Iran, where Meloni, like other European leaders, was pushed to say, we were not consulted. This is not our war, to take a step back from supporting DC on that front. Italy right now is very sensitive to the market shocks that have come as a result of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So that plays very poorly domestically. There's a lot of economic shocks that Italy's having to deal with. And then because Italy also did not allow the U.S. to make offensive strikes from its air bases in Sicily specifically, that then led Donald Trump to threaten to withdraw troops. And that is another fracturing. So we have economic difficulties, we have NATO-aligned difficulties, we have political difficulties. There's a lot to get through there.
And we go back to Juliet in just a moment, but just a quick question about how are Italians then viewing Giorgia Meloni's talks with Marco Rubio, because presumably she's walking this tightrope of wanting better relations precisely because of these economic aftershocks that Italians are experiencing.
Absolutely. I think it's also worth noting really how far we've fallen, or how far that relationship has fallen. Listeners will remember that Giorgia Meloni was the only European leader at Trump's inauguration back in 2025. She was seen as likely going to be this liaison between DC and Brussels. And that was how she was thrusting Italy back onto the international stage, which I do think did play well at home. There was a sense of Italy is back, you know, at the table, at the power-making table, and instead of sort of being the laughing stock of Europe. And that was going well. But you have to see that Meloni's distancing is also coming from the fact that Italians are sort of getting frustrated with being played around with by the Trump administration. We also have to remember the entire Greenland dispute, which it seems shockingly only 3 months ago. And we haven't even gotten to tariffs in all of this. So there is a sense now that Italy's sort of privileged leverage with DC is gone. And so, you know, where does blind faith get you if that's the case?
Faith being a very good topical word. But let's go back to Juliet. What should we be looking for in terms of reading the tea leaves as a result of anything that might be said after this meeting today, even if they don't discuss precisely what was talked about?
You know, that's so interesting. So when you're a Vatican correspondent, you get kind of used to reading between the lines, as you say, or the tea leaves. So first of all, they'll probably release a photo, and you've got to look at the Pope's smile or grimace, as may be. I mean, when Pope Francis met Trump, he famously had on the grimace look, very stern looking, and Trump was smiling away next to him. You're also going to have to look at how long the communique is going to be, how warm it is. The longer, the better, of course. And if the word cordial is used, well, that's sort of diplomatic speak for very lukewarm in terms of relations between the two sides. So that's kind of what you're going to have to be looking for. It should be coming out quite soon, because because the Pope also met Donald Tusk this morning, the Polish leader, and that communique has come out, and they talked about cordial and acknowledged good relations, and they talked about what they had discussed there. So we're waiting on that right away, and we'll be certainly keen to see also what sort of gifts were exchanged. That's also very interesting, the symbolism of them.
Diplomacy really has its own very own language. Thank you very much for joining us on the line there from Zurich, Juliet Lindley, and here in London, Anita Riotta. And now let's get a check of the day's other news headlines with Hassan Anderson.
Thanks, Fanula. Iran is expected to respond today to the US proposal to end the war, moving closer to an agreement on a short memorandum. Yesterday, the US military fired on an Iranian-flagged tanker heading to an Iranian port, enforcing its blockade. Meanwhile, Israel targeted a top Hezbollah commander in the first strike in Beirut since the ceasefire in Lebanon. Russia has warned foreign diplomats in Kyiv that it would attack the city if Ukraine disrupted World War II commemorations in Moscow this weekend. Russia and Ukraine have traded strikes today, wounding 13 people in the Russian border city of Bryansk and one person in Ukraine's Dnipro. In Taiwan, a former television news host and 6 military personnel, active and retired, have been indicted on espionage charges. Lin Shenyu, a former CTI news host and YouTuber, had used his bank accounts since 2013 to funnel bribes to military personnel in exchange for classified information. And South Korea's homegrown KF-21 fighter jet has cleared its final development hurdle by winning combat suitability approval 11 years after the program began. The decision marks a major step for Korea's defense industry, with officials saying it opens a new era in which Korea can now defend its airspace with a fighter developed with indigenous technology. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Fanula.
Thank you, Hassan. Now let's get the latest business news with Bloomberg's Ewan Potts. And Ewan, good to hear from you. We just heard about the US-Iran peace talks in the headlines. So how have the markets been reacting?
Hello, Fanula. Yeah, back-to-back records for many stock markets around the world, led by the S&P in the United States. Oil's been going in the other direction, slumping 12% in the previous 2 sessions, now trading below $100 a barrel on Brent. The key driver is that mounting confidence that an agreement in the Middle East is within reach. In case you missed it, it has been a phenomenal rally in stock markets over the past few weeks. First, we had that sharp sell-off on the days after February 28th when Trump started his war in the Middle East. But as ever in markets, those emotions of fear and greed are never far from the surface. Small investors have been really got quite accustomed to buying the dip. Every time shares sell off, they swoop in, pick up the stocks, and it turns out to be a winning strategy. Now, that hasn't always worked in the past, and it won't always work in the future. But in recent years, it's been pretty successful. So that brings a lot of FOMO for investors when prices are going down and then they start to rise. And also the taco trade, Trump always chickens out, has also become rather popular as Trump tweets some really harsh measures. Investors swoop in and buy shares on the expectations that he will change his mind or go in the other direction. It is also worth pointing out that stock prices, though, have been held up by a very strong corporate earnings season, both in the United States and in Europe. Companies have been doing very well in the first 3 months of this year. First quarter earnings growth in Europe currently running at 5.5%. Year on year, and that compares to market expectations for 2.5%. So corporate profits have been holding up very well. But of course, fair to say that that's the period January, February, March, and that doesn't cover much of the period after the war started. So the economic effects had not really fed through then. So the key question, I think, is what earnings look like in the current quarter and later on in the year.
And some uncertainty, of course, caused by the war with Iran over jet fuel shortages. And this, of course, as people in the global north, look ahead to a summer holiday season. Are they going to be having a staycation, do you think?
Yeah, well, airlines in Europe are closely watching levels of jet fuel. Now, Europe generally has stockpiles of about 80 million barrels of kerosene. Currently, that stockpile is about 30 million barrels. So we are already quite depleted. Something like 10% of the world's jet fuel and kerosene is produced in the Middle East. But the situation is actually rather worse than that, because Middle East producers of crude have been struggling, of course, to deliver that oil to buyers outside the region. So refineries all around the world producing jet fuel haven't got the inputs. So that is causing a real crunch. And if you think the increase in petrol prices has been bad, try being an airline. Jet fuel prices have roughly doubled since war broke out in the Middle East. And European airlines are under particular pressure. Refineries in the region have been closing for years. They are unable to compete with the bigger and more efficient plants in Asia. And that means that about 40% of jet fuel used in the European Union is now imported. And typically half of that comes through Hormuz. Analysts reckon that if Hormuz remains shut, we could start having problems by the end of June. And faced with those higher fuel costs and lower supply, airlines have already axed thousands of flights, and they've been grounding older, less efficient aircraft. And of course, they have been raising airfares. I think even if the Hormuz situation improves in the next couple of weeks, and who knows what news we'll get from the Middle East, I think there's a fair chance we're going to see more of these measures from the world's airlines.
All right, unfortunately. So we'll leave it there. Ewan Potts, thank you so much. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You're back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Let's get the latest design news now. And for that, I'm joined in the studio by Monocle's design editor, Nick Moniz. Nick, the Trump administration...
I felt the need to break the tension. Let's go.
You saw me about to say the Trump administration's branding
some levity
architect.
before diving into it. The news. This is what we're talking about. The announcement of Peter Arnell as chief brand architect. Now, this is for the National Design Studio, which Trump formed with an executive order last year, run by Joe Gebbia, co-founder of Airbnb. I think it's a good thing. I have such mixed feelings about this.
Why? Because how important is branding? I mean, that's speaking to anyone who is in the branding world knows exactly how important it is. But where does this resonate with Donald Trump? What kind of branding is he looking for?
Because I think there's two things kind of going on here. One, I think this is a great initiative. I think that every country should have a national design studio and a chief brand architect. I mean, we're lucky enough to travel a lot here at Monocle. I'm bouncing all over the globe. The number of times that I am heading to a country trying to access whatever kind of visa services they have, and I can't differentiate between what's the legitimate website, what's the maybe sketchy one where they're trying to turn a little profit on the side and scam you a little bit. I think so often, it can be so difficult for governments to justify spending money on something like design, which maybe is seen as a little bit frivolous when there's other priorities like, education or healthcare. But you kind of realise that the impact this can have on government efficiency, but also people's trust and faith in a government when they can't clearly distinguish or understand what is legitimate and what isn't. And that's why I think this whole move is quite good. But I think to your point, there's this, as everything that Trump does, there's this blurring of the personal brand with the
country brand. Exactly. Yeah. So is it the branding of America, the branding of Trump, or are they synonymous with?
I think that sadly, it feels like they're becoming synonymous. I mean, even if we jump out a little bit and we look at the work that the National Design Studio is doing, and amazing pedigree. Joe, who runs it, he's a chief product officer at Airbnb. He's the founder of Samara, which is an ADU housing company. So he's clearly interested in the way that we live and work. A graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design, one of the best schools of design in the United States. There's brilliant people behind it. Even Peter Arnell, who, as this is the news, the chief brand architect, runs Arnell Group, sensational work, huge clients like Samsung. They know what they're doing. There are 27,000 government websites they need to rebrand, but some of them are like Trump RX, which is a pharmaceutical website.
Do we know what the brief is, though, for the government websites?
I mean, this is it. We're going to start to kind of see how it gets rolled out. I mean, I believe Trump RX is one of the government websites, which is the concerning thing, right, as part of this. It's this blurring of this huge personality and the government itself. And I guess that is something that we consistently see, the changes he makes to the White House, the decisions everything's made with Trump's personal brand in mind. And you even see the way that the National Design Studio talks about the work they're doing. I mean, comments from Arnell and Joe Gebbia, they're talking about things like, this government's run like a private enterprise. It's that whole entrepreneurial mindset that has been imbued in these public services.
Let me ask you a question about what is taking place in Europe. And I'm thinking particularly in relations with President Trump, the Trump administration, and entrepreneurs, builders, designers in Eastern Europe who are eager to get his branding on their buildings or vice versa.
I mean, specifically, there's a new Trump Tower that's been mooted for Tbilisi in Georgia, designed by Gensler, amazing architecture studio. And to be honest, the building doesn't look half bad, but it's just that sort of classic thing with Trump emblazoned on the top. And I understand, you look at the support he has in the US. I understand the appeal for countries that are maybe looking to tap into the American tourism market. That it does kind of make sense to build these buildings. We also see it, to jump back to the US recently, the proposal for the Trump Presidential Library. Yes, it's a library, but it's also going to have a hotel built into it as well, with Trump emblazoned on the top as well. So it's this kind of shameless, he calls himself a businessman. He's probably a businessman. Actually, he's definitely a businessman more than a politician. It's this shameless self-promotion that I think sometimes you almost think that the idea is good. Certainly for these, European countries trying to tap into an American tourism market, but it's just the execution of it and maybe the fact that it is so shamelessly self-serving.
But it's really interesting to me that in the Eastern Europe, in Georgia, for example, there is this sense that Americans will come because they have a Trump building, a beautiful Trump building.
I believe it. I always, this is maybe the lazy way out of it, but, I have family in the US, a broad church of political support. Plenty of people that don't like him, but I've family that do like him, and they are the sort of people that would, if they're going to Georgia, to Tbilisi, they'll probably go to Hard Rock Cafe and then the Trump Tower.
Yes. A little like some people we know going to Spain and only going to the English and the Irish hospitality suites.
100%. So, it kind of makes sense from a numbers side of thing, from a bottom line side of thing, from even I guess this psychological side of things for the people that are travelling. But I think once you zoom out and think about the fact that this is coming from a government, it kind of gets a little bit murky, a little bit dirty almost.
Yeah, well, things will never be the same again, I suspect. But Nick Moniz, Monocle's design editor, thank you so much for joining us there. And you're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. It's that time of the week again, and time for the Global Countdown. And joining me is Monocle's senior correspondent, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Now, the Eurovision semi-finals kick off in Vienna next Tuesday, Fernando, but let's talk about the politics this year. Several countries are choosing to boycott the contest because they don't think it's right for Israel to compete against the backdrop of the situation in Gaza. What difference do you think it will make to the contest itself?
I think it will make a huge difference because, a lot of the countries there are not there anymore, at least this year. They're so important for Eurovision cultural history. I can talk about Ireland here. Mm-hmm. They won 7 times, a record together with Sweden. We don't have Spain as well, which is one of the big 5. They will be missed. But it's also interesting how the vast majority of countries, they are there. And I think that we're only going to see real change in perhaps if Israel belongs to the EU or not, only if one of the major countries.
And who are the major countries?
Well, I'm guessing here the UK, Germany, France, because even the number of countries that we have here, 35, which is your kind of usual number. Because usually every year some countries, they drop because sometimes of financial concerns as well. But by the way, besides the politics, before we start the top 5, I'm talking to Eurovision royalty here.
Wow.
I remember when you told me that you've hosted a song contest. My jaw dropped.
Well, only because we were talking about the Eurovision and that we might talk about it this week, and I felt I should let you know that I many years ago, and it was still colour television, I hosted the Eurovision Song Contest in that kind of stream of years when Ireland won about 5 in a row, and I think it was the second year, Ireland had won the year before for the first time, and then Ireland won that night again. Yeah, it was an unforgettable experience. But when it comes down to it, I think you've been to more Eurovisions than I have.
Since 2013, official Eurovision correspondent here from Monaco, and I'm very excited to go to Vienna next week as well.
So you've got 5 songs that you think are going to be really special at this year's Eurovision. But let me first, before we go to them, what is your criteria for a good Eurovision song?
This is actually is not even a personal criteria. You know, there are websites where you can actually, make a bet in which song you want to win. So, I did a compilation, and those are generally the 5 favorites. And of course, things can change and you know why they change? Because, we see videos of the rehearsal. Sometimes the song is great, but will the act be good on stage? Sometimes the clothes is not right. Something is not right. The song is great on a video, on a produced package, but sometimes we need that raw emotion on the night. So things can change. But shall we start at number 5?
Yes, let's.
We're heading to France, and this song...
Always a strong candidate.
Always strong. It's been a while since they won, so who knows, maybe this is their year. With Monroe, we Regardez.
No drama whatsoever.
No drama. We picked, the most operatic and emotional part of the song. And, she's only 17.
Wow.
That's incredible. And she grew up, she's French, but she grew up between the US and France. And she won a talent show in France as well called Prodige. And, she is one. I mean, she's so talented. So maybe could be the year that France is back.
And then we have Australia as your number 4 and a very famous chanteuse singing there.
Very famous, and it's interesting. Eurovision is becoming that mix. We have a lot of new talent like Monroe, but we also have, Delta Goodring. I mean, she's one of the most successful Australian acts in history. So it's quite an interesting choice. Maybe Australia, they haven't been doing that well in recent years, I have to say. So I think they are, throwing
pushing
Delta.
the boat out.
Oh, yes. This is a very nice ballad by Delta Goodring, and number 4 representing Australia with Eclipse.
When we
It's a grower. When I first heard Eclipse, I was like, oh, it's okay.
It's very Eurovision.
Very Eurovision.
All right, let's move on to Denmark.
Denmark, that's an interesting one. I think this one is a bit of a fan favorite. I'll tell you more about the act, but let's have a listen. And number 3, it's Soren Torpgaard Lund with Farvegar Henjen. And forgive my Danish. He's got the right outfits. He does he's very good on stage, and no wonder he performed in Denmark for West Side Story, for Kinky Boots, Romeo and Juliet. So he's a very kind of experienced actor, especially for musicals, but now I think he's focusing on his career as a singer-songwriter and Eurovision potential winner.
So he should have a strong performance on the night. And then Greece. Greece is your number 2, or the fans' number 2, but either way.
Absolutely. So Greece is back with the very fun Achilles with Ferto. I actually had the pleasure to speak with Achilles a few days ago. The interview will be out very soon here on Monocle Radio. It's quite interesting because when you hear the tune that we're going to hear, it's much deeper than you might think. But first, shall we have a listen at number 2?
Real estate, ferto, sashimi tuna, ferto, tesoro loyali designer sul leo, ferto, leather palto, ferto, che escargot, ferto, rally cars, yo me stars, su IPA, ferto.
It's so current, all these hyper-pop elements, but the song itself, it talks about our pursuit for material excess. So it's a reflection on overconsumption.
Oh.
And it's funny when I spoke to him, because he did grow up, when Greece had the economic crisis. So there's kind of some kind of social politics into this song as well.
I was going to say this is so Eurovision as well, because there are so many typical Eurovision types of songs, but it's a very strong entry. And you're number one.
Number one is the song, I have to be honest, is the only one from the top 5 here that give me goosebumps. It's very good. I'm sorry to say, I'm going to be very clear here. No Wonder is the favorite, and I hope they win, because what an interesting performance. Well, we're going to listen to it and then I'll explain why I find it so interesting. So for Finland, this is Linda Lamperius and Pete Parkkonen with Likenheid. It's wonderful. It's classical music meeting pop, literally, because Linda, she's a very famed classical musician and violinist in Finland, one of the best-selling. I think she's the best-selling classical music artist in Finland, and she has a very, very long career. And Pete is a pop star. And then they met, they wrote this song, which I believe the translation is Flamethrower. And when you see that on stage, there's fire, there's violins, there's everything you can possibly imagine.
Tell us briefly before you go, you are actually going to go and be in Vienna. What are you expecting? What's it like a typical Eurovision night? You've been to so many.
Oh, it's so many. It's sometimes quite unpredictable. Sometimes you are at your hotel having breakfast and it's like, oh, the Serbian entry is just there close to me. It's a really nice feeling going to cities. And it's interesting now, Vienna, because the last years, was Basel, Liverpool, fairly small towns, but this time we're going to a big capital. I'm very, very excited. And yeah, it's always a very special period of the year.
The year I did it was in Mill Street in County Cork, and there was a Eurovision village, and the atmosphere all week was just electric. I missed a lot of it because I was either in rehearsal or doing an interview, but I can tell you it was something that stayed with me for days and weeks afterwards, just in terms of the vibe itself. It was really extraordinary.
The city changes. I've mentioned here a few days ago that I think almost 100,000 tickets were sold for all the Eurovision events. So the city will be so excited.
Oh, thank you. And good luck there travelling and safe travels. And we look forward to hearing from you on Monocle Radio. Fernando Augusto Pacheco, thank you. And that is all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Chris Chermak. Our researcher was Josefina Astrid Nagler-Gomez. And our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Fionnuala Sweeney. Goodbye and thanks for listening.